Hey Connor, don't you miss the good old days when our country upheld Christian values?
Yeah, all the time.
Welcome back to Post-Denomination, a fake church service run by a seminarian and a failed grad student to dunk and debunk the funky shit Christians say. My name is Jonathan, joined as always by Connor, and today we're talking about Christian nationalism. Before we start, I have a little disclaimer. This is going to be pretty quote heavy. I feel like I need to do this to show, not tell, the absurdity of Christian nationalism. I've given Connor quite a lot of quotes that he will have to read throughout this episode, and we can definitely clown on the stupid shit, but hopefully there's going to be some meaningful criticism in there as well.
Sounds good.
We do have quite a lot to get through. This will be our first two-parter episode, at least in terms of release. Who knows? But we'll fucking figure that out.
Let's go.
So, what do you know about Christian nationalism? And or Catholic integralists, I think is what the Catholic side calls it.
Oh, that's interesting. That's the first I've heard of that. But very little. I don't know very much about Christian nationalism.
What comes to mind?
America.
That's so genuine.
America and perhaps maybe like medieval Europe comes to mind. Like the Western and Eastern Roman empires, perhaps. Yeah, those sort of things.
Yeah. It is pretty hard to describe, not because it's particularly complex, but because it's paradoxical and fluid, the definition.
Right.
So we're going to start with a working definition that we'll sort of add on to as we go along throughout the episode.
Perfect.
I do want to note that there are weaker and stronger forms of Christian nationalism. Most of the time I will be talking about the more extreme forms when I say like the Christian nationalist or Christian nationalism, and won't really be making the distinction. But like Perry and Whitehead, and see the reading list if you want to follow up on that, make this distinction between accommodators of Christian nationalism and ambassadors for Christian nationalism.
Right.
A distinction that I, again, will not be making. So,
then why bring it up?
Just so people know, Christian nationalism is not a monolith.
Oh, okay. Glad you're being sympathetic to your opponents.
Yeah, they are weird in all sorts of ways. Starting with Christian. The Christian in Christian nationalism refers to, at least in contemporary Western society, a very specific outgrowth of the Reformed and Charismatic traditions of like the 70s and 80s.
Oh, interesting.
It's not so much concerned with the theology, but it adopts the language and decorum of that Charismatic Reformed tradition to use it as a marker of identity.
Okay.
By nationalism, it refers to two-ish things. The first one is that it assumes nations are the prime unit of history, or the prime mover of history.
Okay, yeah.
And then the second part is that our nation, whatever our it happens to be, has an essential property, has an essence to it.
Okay, interesting. You'll say more about that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you put those together, what happens is that it's the nation, not the church, that prepares the world for Jesus' second coming. And it's my nation, not Israel, to do so. And therefore, I must fight to get my country to reflect or regain its Christian essence.
Oh. I mean, my first thought is that doesn't sound Christian, and it doesn't sound intuitive either.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna have to hear more.
Dude, this is honestly a shit show to write, because it's like the definition that even Christian nationalists use of Christian nationalism is always a sort of moving target.
Right.
And it's done so. We'll get into it.
Like it just sounds unbelievably secular. Like
it is. So yeah.
Where is it just sounds like nationalism. Where is the Christian in this? I mean, aside from this essence part, but okay, yeah, you're gonna.
I mean, nationalism is the predominant word. There is the noun. Christian is just an adjective.
It's like Christian nationalism.
Exactly. A little Christian flavor. That's why I say it's not so much the theology of like the Reformed tradition or the Charismatic tradition. It's just the signifiers of those traditions.
Mm-hmm. And because you said it was these traditions popping up in the 70s and 80s, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess we're talking about a more modern Christian nationalism. Yeah. Okay.
Contemporary, mostly Western, but this sort of Christian nationalism can be seen in like Bolsonaro in Brazil. I don't know the guy in Poland, but the guy in Poland.
Yeah, the guy in Poland. Yeah, that guy.
The lady in Italy.
Right.
The new.
Yeah. The granddaughter of Mussolini.
Yeah, I think something like that. Yeah.
Somehow related. or the cousin of the granddaughter.
Exactly. Like, honestly, maybe it's a fake heritage, because the truth doesn't seem to matter to
No, narrative building. Yeah.
I think the confusion you're getting at, Perry and Whitehead, refer to Christian nationalism as a cultural framework rather than a theology or an ideology even. It is just a way for people to sort of think about who they are.
Right.
Yeah. And so if you want to read quote number 1.
Sure. For many people, sociologists, Djorsky and Perry argue, Christian refers less to theology than to heritage. Drawing on their own survey, they found that more than a fifth of respondents who wanted the government to declare the U.S. a Christian nation also described themselves as being secular or an adherent of a non-Christian faith. Paradoxically, so did more than 15% of self-identified Christians.
So when you say it doesn't sound Christian, it's because it's kind of not. The last sentence shocked me. I had to reread it a couple times to make sure that I got it. 15% of people who self-identify as Christians describe themselves as not adhering to Christianity, whether being atheist or a follower of a different faith.
Right. That's interesting.
Yeah. So when people start using the term Christian to define heritage, basically they're just trying to define an in-group. So how are they defining who's in? Who gets to participate in that heritage? Do you have any guesses? Sort of off the cuff, completely speculative.
Yeah, so probably middle class or above, white men, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, a lot more thorough. I really like the intersectionality. I was going to get to class last, actually.
Oh, okay.
I was going to start with whiteness first, because it does seem to correlate with whiteness the most. So you have what makes Christian nationalism distinct compared to like Christians is the white nationalist part.
Right. Okay.
The sexist part can be kind of seen in Christianity as well. And then the classist part is sort of like 50-50 too. But yeah, so Stephen Wolfe, he wrote the book for Christian nationalism called The Case for Christian Nationalism.
Oh, okay.
This is supposed to be for a mainstream audience. Thank God I didn't end up reading it because it would have probably broken me. I ended up reading like a 20-page review of it by a conservative, which we'll talk about.
Okay.
But he talks about ethnicity as, or the defining feature for a nation.
Really?
Or the in-group of a nation, yeah.
Okay.
But he doesn't want to say race because he's a little bit too politically savvy for that. He knows if he starts saying race, then he's going to be called a racist. And he's like, I'm not a racist, but.
Right. Yeah.
And so it's awful because he will cite really, really out there race realist organizations. But he'll be like, I'm not a racist, guys. Ethnicity is not about race. It's about similarity.
What kind of similarity? Like,
yeah.
Like similarity on like BA16 alleles? Like, what are we talking about here?
He doesn't define it. And that becomes problematic. He doesn't define it.
It's the whole like, it's culture, not race thing, right?
Exactly.
That's
that.
Exactly.
And he
that.
goes, all you leftists are going to call me racist. I'm not going to defend myself to those arguments. So he doesn't.
Okay.
And he wrote like a 485-page book.
What?
And didn't really define similarity, which is the key fucking feature.
Oof.
So they define by ethnicity, which again is just race with extra steps. And the race that they obviously want to be in the privileged position, or, so to speak, the chosen race, are the white people.
Right.
And it's not necessarily like statistically. There's a lot of Black Christian nationalists or like people of color that hold to like Christian nationalist ideas. But in the Western world, at least, it's the white Christian nationalists that have access to power.
Okay.
Right? And they can use that power to live out the fantasy of Christian nationalism.
Okay. Yeah.
It allows the dominant group to use like the divine appointment idea. Like they were chosen by God, therefore they should have the privileged position in their society.
Their ethnicity was chosen by God?
Yeah, they are the chosen nation.
Right. I mean, would it be improper to say they're more talking about culture? So like the Western culture, the white Western culture has been chosen by God, something like that. Would that be more right to say? But I guess they all come in these like it's a package, right?
This was one of the difficulties that I had in writing this. We will talk about it in terms of like from an America-centric point of view. Like you can't be a real American without being Christian, but you can't be a real Christian unless you're a white, born in the United States American. So the definitions end up relying on each other, and then that's why it becomes so fluid, and that's why it seems really confusing.
Okay.
But
yeah, that's gonna need some that's going to need some defense because that sounds pretty out there.
Yeah. Just to drive home the point. Again, like I said, I didn't read the case for Christian nationalism because...
Don't waste your time.
So Reverend DeYoung is the author of this review.
Okay.
And he, in his review of the book, he talks about how the church has become too meek.
Too meek.
Too meek.
The church whose founder was "Blessed are the meek."
Exactly.
Yeah.
He thinks the church has become too meek, and he's like, of course people are looking for strongman figures like Ben Shapiro, Tucker Carlson, all that. I'm like, you're a reverend, my dude. But anyways, this guy, he also downplays the level of like discrimination in this country. And he also makes sure to point out that he doesn't disagree with Wolff on principle in terms of creating what Wolff calls theocratic Caesarian state. Like Caesar as in the dictator or the emperor of Rome, Caesar. So if you want to read quote 2.
Sure. I do want to read quote 2.
This isn't about the authoritarian part. It's about Reverend DeYoung. Just to show that he's not a fucking lefty like me.
Okay, Reverend DeYoung. Opponents of these older views should be careful not to overstate their case. It's one thing to make a prudential argument against, say, the enforceability of blasphemy laws in our day. It's another to argue that such laws are in principle wrong. Wolff is to be commended for having the courage of his convictions and forcing Christians to think more carefully about a host of conclusions that most Western Christians assume just can't be true.
When I was reading this, I highlighted it. On Wolff is to be commended for having the courage. And it was just question mark. He wants to enforce blasphemy laws, which means stoning to death if you are caught blaspheming, or what he considers to be blaspheming.
Yeah, what? So I say Jesus Christ and I get stoned?
Exactly.
Oof.
And Reverend DeYoung is like, look, the enforceability might be an issue, but on principle, it's not necessarily wrong. This guy was like, whoa, my dude, in a 500-page book, maybe you should define your similarity principle, because your argument is starting to resemble, quote, certain blood and soil nationalisms, end quote. And blood and soil it still is, I guess, because neo-Nazis unfortunately exist, a Nazi slogan.
Oof.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Reverend Young again. But you don't have to be a left-wing watchdog to wonder how these, quote-unquote, similarity arguments work out in practice. In a footnote, Wolff rejects modern racialist principles and denies that he's making a white nationalist argument. But if we cannot accept the creedal nation concept, and if ethnicities are grouped by cultural similarity, it's an open question how much cooperation and togetherness blacks and whites, not to mention Asians and Hispanics and Native Americans, will ever share, or if they should even try to live and worship together. Oh my God.
Again, this is supposed to be...
This is horrible.
Like the book, the most mainstream book for Christian nationalism.
That's not even... It's so bad.
Yeah. A book that argues for or advocates for a theocratic Caesarian state is supposed to be the best of this ism.
The best of Christian nationalism.
Christian nationalism.
Yeah. Well,
unfortunately,
what?
Despite it being very race-focused, right, it can get confusing because it's about race until it's not. And again, this goes back to this idea that Christian gets used to define American, and American gets used to define Christian, and American really is just a stand-in for white. So, despite Christian nationalism not being a coherent ideology, it does have a sort of like cluster of belief. So we're going to do a little fun case study where I get Connor to read or look over Christian nationalist content or descriptions of Christian nationalist services and see what he can extrapolate from there.
Oh, God.
These are only a few examples, but I did try to choose on the spectrum of Christian nationalism. So the kind of weird Christian nationalists to the outright offensive Christian nationalists.
Okay. What would you have me do, sir?
We'll look at the painting first.
Look at the painting. Okay.
Yeah. So this painting is titled One Nation Under God. Published, or I don't... Are paintings published? I'm going to say published. Published in 2009 by John McNaughton.
It's not published. The painting was released or something. I don't know.
Yeah, the new painting just dropped. Published in 2009 by John McNaughton.
2009?
2009.
This was in 2000 and...
This was a year after Obama got elected.
Oh my God.
McNaughton is an American painter.
Is Obama in this? Okay, I'm just looking at it now.
Probably not, actually. Oh yeah, but it's called One Nation Under God. If people want to look that up.
Doesn't look like it. Oh, is there the devil in here?
There
is the devil. Oh, yo, how'd I catch that? Okay, no, I see what he's trying to do. He's trying to do like the roof of the Sistine Chapel type deal here, with all these like little like Easter eggs. It's kind of, I mean, that's. Like,
I mean, I wouldn't compare it to the Sistine Chapel because the Sistine Chapel doesn't have Easter eggs. This is
it does
what Tarkovsky would call propaganda.
All right.
I'm not a big Tarkovsky fan. Like, he's a filmmaker and critic, but he thinks relying on simple, like very easy symbols is propaganda.
Right. Okay. So there's a lot here.
So describe the painting.
It's a painting whose central figure is Jesus Christ, and it looks like he's wearing a golden robe, with a red sash, and he's holding up a piece of paper, which I'm assuming is like the Declaration of Independence. Probably.
Where is
probably
this?
And they're on the steps of the Capitol building and the White House. I guess. I mean, those. Yeah, they're together in the frame here.
Yeah.
And there's an American flag in the background, and then there's all these presumably American figures in the background behind Jesus, and then in the foreground in front of Jesus. Yeah, that's the painting.
Can you describe Jesus?
He's white. He's like the typical like white Jesus. He's got the nice flowing brown hair.
Yeah.
And he's quite tall.
He's very tall.
Yeah, he's a foreboding figure. And yeah, that's Jesus.
Okay. Anybody stand out?
So Satan popped out to me in the corner here, just like plotting. I noticed a pregnant woman. I don't know what that's about. Yeah. I noticed there's like business people with like papers strewn all on the steps right before Jesus.
Oh, we should talk about the papers too, actually. Do you recognize any of the figures behind him? How good is your American history?
Oh, okay. Amazing. Okay. I'm killing them. Okay, I see George Washington, Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah.
Theodore Roosevelt, Reagan, the housekeeper.
There is James Madison, yeah.
Okay. There's Matt.
Wow, look at you, dude.
Okay, let's go.
Yeah, so to recap, we have Jesus standing on the sort of steps of the Capitol in the White House, a bunch of former American politicians with notable sort of exceptions. Like, you have the founding fathers, of course, but then you have Reagan.
There's like cultural figures too. So there's there's a female astronaut.
Yeah.
And there's also there's Benjamin Franklin. And like some soldiers. I think there's more cultural figures. That's not all politicians, but
yeah.
Wait a minute.
You have a bunch of.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
What's 53 here? Oh no.
Ah. Wait, before we get that,
okay.
Actually,
there's a lot.
I want you to look at the papers. Go to 57.
Okay, 57.
Or 56 and 57.
Supreme Court judge. Wait, 57.
Yeah.
Why is he got his hand in it today? And then
you want to read what?
57 notorious court cases.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm guessing one of them is going to be Roe v. Wade. It's got to be, right? What's another one? Like,
I don't think any of these are all that.
Okay, yeah, Martin v. Hunter. Who knows Martin v. Hunter? Like, nobody.
Yeah. So what is the Supreme Court Justice doing?
The Supreme Court Justice has their hands in their face in sorrow. They're distraught and saddened with their knees on the floor before the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and we can look at the immigrant, which is 53.
The fucking immigrant. Why does he have a name?
You could also read 52 as well if you want to read that for our listeners.
52 is a businesswoman.
There's a businesswoman. And these people how are they reacting to Jesus?
Let me see. So I lost it. 52 is the businesswoman. Which woman is this? Okay. She's just like praying, like got her eyes up in reverence, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
The immigrant's sort of like he's got his right hand up sort of apprehensively. I don't know.
Yeah, like
whoa, who's like this guy? Like,
you see these people on the bottom left side. The painter McNaughton talks about how you put all these people who are at least at the very least sympathetic to the message of Christ.
Okay.
Where the Supreme Court justices, and where Satan is, in the bottom right side of the painting, is where all maybe the enemies of Christianity are.
Why is the pregnant woman an enemy? Why is the pregnant woman an enemy of Christ?
I don't really know exactly.
And Mr. Entertainment.
Yeah.
Oh my god. Okay, y'all need to be looking at this as we're like describing it, because there is so much in this. We should have put that in like at the start of this. Like, you need to look at this painting. This is insane.
Okay, give me a clean recording of that. I'll put that at the beginning. So
what do I say? This painting is insane. Look at the painting. Find the painting. Google the painting.
Sounded like Trump almost.
No, don't say that.
This painting is the best painting.
The best painting. You think you know painters? I know painters. Where are you going with this?
Read The Businesswoman or The Immigrant. You can do both or either.
What do you mean read it?
Go down to the section where it has a little.
What number is The Businesswoman?
53, 52 and 53.
52 and 53. Okay, this is describing the businesswoman. Our country has come far in having equal opportunities available to women. In the workplace, both males and females struggle to maintain their conservative values. This is difficult among the social changes we are experiencing today. And then 53 starts with a question. Why does he have his hand up like that? There are many good people in America. They are not all Christian. I wanted him to have a look of shock when he realizes where the source of America's greatness comes from, as he sees Christ holding the Constitution. We live in a country where we are free to worship as we please. What is that? Oh, dude.
I am going to ask you what you think Christian nationalism believes in, and maybe I'm giving an answer away. But I do want to point out that there's an assumption that the immigrant is not Christian. Just baked in there.
It's just, and the fact that it's just like immigrant.
Yeah.
Like not, there's no qualifiers. None. Oh, dude. I don't know the statistics on the amount of Christians in Canada or America. I know it's high, but that's because of a lot of nominal Christians. They have like these distinctions between religiosity and then I forget the other word.
Like religious practice versus
something like that. But like in Korea, 1/3 of people are Christian. 1/3.
Yeah.
And most of the people that immigrate from Korea that come to Canada or America are Christians.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and then to say, what does he say? A look of shock.
I love how
why would they be
diplomatic he's trying to be though. There are many good people in America. They are not all Christian, guys.
Oh man, this is ridiculous.
Yeah. I do want to point out that not just Korea, right? But like a lot of these refugees that are coming from the Middle East, a lot of them, I think statistically 1/3 of them are Christian.
Right.
But you listen to Trump and them and they're like, those are terrorists.
Yeah. Or people are like shocked when they hear about these 2,000-year-old churches in Palestine getting completely destroyed. And they're like,
yeah,
that doesn't sound right.
Yeah, they have churches there?
Yeah, church like a Muslim church, like.
And last one before we sort of wrap up on this painting. Just scroll down a little bit. Okay. 59. You see this guy? Describe this guy. Describe this guy.
Oh, it's the professor.
Yeah, and he's in the bottom right. He's right beside Satan, really.
Yeah, he's right. Oh, jeez. No.
So Connor, watch out. Dude.
No.
Watch out.
He tightly holds his Origin of Species book by Charles Darwin. This represents the liberal left's control of our educational system. His smug expression describes the attitude of many of the educational elite. There's no room for God in education? Oh, okay. I'm not even going to finish reading that. That's ridiculous.
Oh, God.
Okay.
No, I'm out of... You made me laugh out of focus.
I don't know how I came across this, but I came across this article talking about like the weirdest Christian sects in history. And one of them was called the Abectarians. I don't think I'm pronouncing that right. I think they were a branch off of the Anabaptists. But their whole thing was that it was wrong to become literate because the Holy Spirit inspired scripture. In fact, some of them even went so far as it's wrong to learn anything.
Oh.
Because, you know, you're supposed to have like direct access or I don't know, whatever it was. But that's what this is. This is worse.
Yeah.
Education is not compatible.
He is still nothing next to the intelligence of the creator.
Oh, no.
Just remember that when you go into academia, dude. Your intelligence is going to be nothing next to the creator.
Oh, man. Yeah, I'm always forgetting that.
At least McNaughton, when he's describing the immigrant, is like, we live in a country where we are free to worship as we please. At least freedom of religion is still upheld.
Yeah, that's a good thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. We'll go to quote 5.
Oh, no.
This is describing one of the services a couple sociologists went to during the July 4th, the weekend.
Okay.
So Independence Day.
The sanctuary was bursting with stars and stripes, draped from the balcony lining the stage, printed on the identical ties and scarves worn by the 100-person choir and full orchestra. An image of the Bible resting on Old Glory, an American flag, was displayed on all the screens throughout this conservative Baptist church in South Carolina, including in the overflow area, which was quickly filling up. The balcony and ground floor of the sanctuary were already at capacity. The God and country celebration would be starting soon, and it was clear that both God and country were equally sacred in this place. After one particularly rousing part of the worship service, in which the choir and orchestra performed anthems from each branch of the armed forces, the MC, in full military uniform, intoned, "We would be remiss if we did not mention God, author and perfecter of our faith. He's guided and protected this country throughout its history. Any victories we claim are all because of him and his faithfulness, and in the good times and bad, he has always been on our side." Ooh.
We would be remiss if we did not mention God at a church service, at a Sunday service.
Jeez.
Like I said, so far, maybe weird.
Yeah, maybe exactly. Weird. That's sort of like your
not offensive yet.
Yeah.
We're gonna get to offensive.
Oh,
now.
Lovely.
This is in Stephen Wolf's book.
So you got this how? Because you said you didn't read the book. So how'd you get these quotes?
Because Reverend DeYoung was like, maybe if it wasn't for the epilogue, you could be charitable. But then you read the epilogue and you're like, what the fuck did I just read? He just picks out like 10 excerpts just to prove his point.
Okay. All right.
And out of those, I picked 2.
Uh-huh.
I love the way that DeYoung sort of talks about it, because he's like, that Wolf thinks all this is concerning. That he wrote it down is extra troubling. That he and his editors thought it was a good idea to end the book with a series of vituperative, fucking don't know what that word is, harangues is baffling. Is this the civilizational answer we're looking for? Living off the grid, complaining about women, complaining about the regime, complaining about how hard it is to be a white male, warning about the globalists, calling out the dangers of vegetable oil, and chastising Presbyterians with dad bods? Captures a lot of the quotes that we won't be reading.
That's so
pretty
good.
well. It's so well done. Again, DeYoung has some concerning views, in my opinion. I did look at his Twitter. Not a COVID denier, so that's good.
That's the bar?
Yeah, I mean, he told people, hey, wear masks. Just be nice about it, even if you don't believe. Which is, for a conservative priest or pastor, that's the bar that I have for them now.
Yeah, that's it. Okay.
Not a total hack, but again, thinks enforcing blasphemy laws in modern society isn't wrong on principle.
Yikes.
We're in a little gray area with the Reverend. But anyways, can you read a 6 for me?
Sure. We live under a gynocracy, a rule by women. Yeah, that's really self-evident. This may not be apparent on the surface. Oh, okay, you anticipated me. This may not be apparent on the surface, since men still run many things. But the governing virtues of America are feminine vices, associated with certain feminine virtues, such as empathy, fairness, and equality.
Let's just pause there.
Why?
For a second.
Why is equality a feminine virtue?
Why is empathy fairness also?
Okay, but like those are more like, at least, like prima facie. Like
that's true. Equality, liberty, fraternity is the revolutionary sort of like chant.
Right. Like,
I mean, I want to even go back the one sentence before, because he goes, we live under a gynocracy, a rule by women. The next sentence after, he goes, men still run everything. But
no, they run many things.
Oh, sorry. I know it might not seem like women run things because we run most of it, but...
Lord Jesus.
Lord Jesus. We'll finish it off with another Wolf quote and then extrapolate sort of what Christian nationalism...
I'm done with this, man.
I'm telling you.
I don't know if I can handle this anymore. Okay.
I'm telling
Number
you.
7. How did you research all this, dude? How did you not explode? Okay. Christian nationalism should have a strong and austere aesthetic. I was dismayed when I saw the attendees of a recent PCA General Assembly, men in wrinkled, short-sleeve golf shirts, sitting plump in their seats. We have to do better. Yo, he's just body shaming these guys. Pursue your potential, lift weights, eat right, and lose the dad bod. We don't all have to become bodybuilders, but we ought to be men of power and endurance. We cannot achieve our goals with such a flabby aesthetic vision and under the control of modern nutrition? Sneering at this aesthetic vision, which I fully expect to happen, is pure cope. Pure cope. Oh my god, that's like internet language. Like, this is so unprofessional. How old is this guy?
I don't know.
Grace does not destroy T levels. Oh my god. Grace does not destroy T levels. Grace does not perfect testosterone into estrogen. If our opponents want to be fat, have low testosterone, and chug vegetable oil, let them. It won't be us. This can't be real. This can't be real. This can't be real. It can't. Like, this can't be real. Like, the best way to put this is just like, these are Christian incels. Not in like...
Oh, I really like that.
Their behaviors are similar. Not saying like they don't have like fulfilling sex lives or something, but...
I mean, I don't know if it's fulfilling, but he has a sex life.
Right? But
I honestly, with Ben Shapiro saying he's never made his wife wet, I don't know about the fulfilling part. The fact that he has kids clearly suggests that he has a sex life, but...
Right. I mean, maybe not. Maybe they did like IVF or something.
Not true, maybe. Yeah. The question I have in my notes is just make it make sense, Connor. Make it make sense to me.
You look at me way too highly if you want me to make sense of this stuff, dude.
I think Christian incel is honestly incredibly insightful.
I mean, okay, like, if we want to like interpret this as charitably as we can, it should have a strong and austere aesthetic. Okay, yeah. So like, he's got like... Dude, just like... This might be a fun book to read. Like, he actually kind of writes like quite entertainingly. Like, such a flabby aesthetic vision
if he
is
wasn't,
like kind of a bar. Like,
if he wasn't sort of advocating for the stoning of
like
a lot of people,
right? Like,
would be
talking
fun.
about critiquing your opponent's view for having a flabby aesthetic vision. Like, honestly, I think I'm gonna use that. Like, okay, so like, if we want to interpret it like charitably, like, perfect yourself, you know?
Yeah, okay.
Strive for excellence.
Yeah.
You know, don't settle for a mediocre life.
Sure.
You know?
Excellence in terms of what though? What do you think?
So like, if we were to interpret it charitably, it would be in like it would be in all dimensions of life.
Okay.
But this seems to be focused primarily on the physical.
Sure. And when he says things like grace does not destroy T levels, grace does not perfect testosterone into estrogen, what do you think he wants men to be?
I mean, he says he wants men to be powerful in a very simplistic sense of the word, being able to exert force.
Exactly. I think this is why the incel comparison it makes so much sense. If we go to previous quotes and the painting as well, what else do you see in Christian nationalism? So we have this like men need to be powerful.
Yeah. I mean, in the not so much the painting, or I guess in the rhetoric behind the painting, like the propaganda in the painting, because you know the artist is literally just he has all the people literally labeled like it's a fucking an advent calendar. Of propaganda.
Yeah.
So not so much.
So there's no mystery in that
painting.
Exactly.
Like, there's no room for interpretation, right? It's pretty clear.
Yeah, the author is not dead in that one, you know.
No, the author is very much alive. It's very reactive.
Okay, in what sense?
Like, especially in the last two cases.
In the professor one hit home a little bit.
I mean, not so much the professor one, but like the grace does not destroy T levels. Grace does not perfect testosterone into estrogen. We're living in this matriarchy. All this stuff. It's like
gynocracy, actually.
That's like the same, right? Like it's got to be.
It is the same, but I just think gynocracy is so much more vitriolic.
All right, fine. The gynocracy. I think clearly they feel the pressure of the movement of culture, and they see it moving away from some older, more conservative values. You know, go to the gym, protect your family. The man is the provider. All this stuff, and these sort of old narratives are being attacked, and they have to be asserted again.
Yeah. So you were saying being attacked, and so must be defended is the corollary there.
Or worth defense. I mean, it's basically confirms what I said at the start, which is that it's white, male, and middle class. Yeah. Essentially, all of the figures in the painting are white. Most of them are male. And it doesn't look like there's any poor people here. No. Which is the majority of people.
Yeah. I really like what you said, though, about this like reactiveness and this desire to go back
to a bygone age.
Sort of to push against the sort of movement of culture.
Before you say that, I think like I could see a lot of, as with most rhetoric, it being partially appealing to a lot of people. It's like, yeah, obviously, like we shouldn't be chugging vegetable oil. Like that doesn't seem optimal to human flourishing, right?
Yeah.
It's just like that.
But that's not what he's saying.
But it's just that it's like associated with the feminine that seems to be the problem. It's like
exactly.
If you're chugging vegetable oil, you're effeminate. Mm-hmm. It's like,
and that's bad.
Oh, what the heck is that? Like, why? Yeah. Why would that be the case?
I cut this quote from my script. I don't know why. I should have kept it. But so I'll just read it out instead of sending it to you. But sociologist Martin Riesbrod shows that religious movements seeking to return society to its ideal, quote, fundamental arrangements are best understood as a response to threats to the hierarchical order of the patriarchal family. When economic or cultural circumstances destabilize men's proper place, quote unquote, as the head of their household and controller of women's bodies, societies are ripe for fundamentalist resurgence. In How Fascism Works, Yale philosopher Jason Stanley explains, in the fascist imagination, the past invariably involves traditional patriarchal gender roles. This imagined history provides proof to support the imposition of hierarchy in the present, and it dictates how contemporary societies should look and behave. He also demonstrates how a politics of sexual anxiety is constantly at play within fascist societies. In decades past, strongmen and demagogues could rouse populist support by stoking fears of interracial sexuality, polluting the, quote, pure blood of the dominant race. And obviously, a little more detailed than me putting you on the spot sort of extrapolation, but you were getting there. It's like crazy how close you got. You pegged the reactive nature of it. You were dancing around this like feminine masculine dyad that Christian nationalists sort of work with. I don't want to say you didn't hit it. You kind of hit it. This sort of like jingoism, so like this militarily nationalistic position. So like you should defend your place.
Right.
Which you see in the painting and in the service.
Right, yeah. There's quite a few military figures.
Yeah, and in the service, they sing all of the anthems.
Oh, right.
There's no mention of like an actual Christian liturgy going on. No. This is...
They don't sing Amazing Grace. They sing the fourth tune of the Navy. Like
exactly. And as talked about in that quote I just read, the parents of the very unsexy baby that is Christian nationalism is sort of bad biology and bad history.
Okay. So this is getting into like the origin.
Yeah, or like the defense of.
Oh, okay, yeah.
To quote Jason Stanley again, the imagined history provides proof to support the imposition of hierarchy in the present.
Right.
Yeah, and to do so, they have to take on...
What is that age? Like, it's not too remote in the past, correct?
It is At least currently, the ones that I've seen the most are the Reagan era.
Yeah, I see 60s a lot.
Yeah, 60s, 70s. So like post-war and then Reagan era.
Which makes sense. Prosperous time.
Very prosperous time. And an incredibly like propaganda-filled time.
Right.
Right, because the Cold War.
Right.
You see this a lot with the 1700s during the age of colonialism and the mythos of the birth of America. With the Revolutionary War and the fighting for equality, liberty, and fraternity.
Right. So that like,
which they took straight from the French Revolution, but
right. So it would be like there are no vegetable chuggers during the like Civil War sort of thing.
Yeah. I mean, you can see the like militaristic nature.
Like all the men were like fighting and like defending freedom and
yeah, they were going out and conquering lands. And then you also see a lot of love for like Vikings. And a lot of love for like the Roman Empire.
Do you know about this like TikTok trend?
No, I'm not on TikTok.
Okay, well, like girlfriends will ask their boyfriends, how often do you think about the Roman Empire? And then record their reaction. And so this is kind of like a screening question for people dating now. Like how often do you think about the Roman Empire?
It's like the Beyonce question.
It's like the Beyonce question, yeah.
Yeah, so you have a little military like conquest. Alexander the Great looked and wept because there was nothing left to conquer, whatever, that kind of mentality. But I think one of the reasons why the Roman Empire is so associated with this kind of stuff is because of how close this kind of stuff is to fascism. And obviously the father of fascism, Mussolini, used a lot of Roman heritage markers or signifiers in talking about how to make Italy great again, so to speak.
So bad history and bad biology.
To be able to do that, they have to have the middle step of saying what is also good.
Okay.
Which is where I'm going to ask you to give me a quick definition of ethical naturalism. You don't have to be too technical because despite people like Wolf claiming to be ethical naturalists, they aren't anything. Right? They don't have a coherent ideology. They don't actually think about these things.
Oh, you think that's... I don't know. That sounds too mean.
Maybe it is, but I think they're just opportunistic, power-hungry motherfuckers.
Okay. That could definitely be the case.
They will take on the decorum of whatever the popular cultural framework is and try to finagle in there.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So for our discussion here, I think simply what ethical naturalism is just that we can derive moral facts from natural facts, from facts about the world. So say we deem some outcome to have positive utility. We can then also say that outcome is good, or that outcome is preferable, that outcome is worth pursuing, that we ought to pursue this outcome. We derive obligations from it. So connecting utility, this is just one example, to connecting utility to what is good. Famously, this is really hard to do. So you have what's known as the is-ought distinction, or Hume's law, which is that you can never derive an ought from an is. That just because it is the case that we can colonize the moon doesn't mean that we should colonize the moon, or just because it is the case that cigarettes are bad for your lungs, that you ought not to smoke cigarettes. So this is a famous problem within meta-ethics. But just for our context, just that we can derive what we ought to do from objective facts.
Yeah, can I ask you actually to go a little bit more specific and talk about how a Christian might become an ethical naturalist, or what would be the line of reasoning for a Christian, or a quote-unquote Christian? How might a Christian, or a person who calls themselves Christian, derive?
Right. So this is going to be
from the is
pretty relevant, I think, when we end up talking about sex and honestly for a ton of topics related to like Christian politics. I think the tendency for like the Christian ethical naturalist is going to be something like a Aristotelian functionalism, meaning that things, natural objects, humans, animals, all objects, they have functions, they have purposes. What it means to fulfill the good, or when we're asking what we ought to do, we ought to ask the question of, well, what is the object's function? What is its nature? So if you have a knife and you have a sharp knife, it's good that the knife is sharp because a knife is for cutting. And so we're able to make a good relation there because we know about the knife's function. Then we tie that back to humans. If we can discover what the purpose of the human is, then we can figure out what's good for the human, what we ought to do as humans. And Christians who believe that God has ordained the natural world think that these purposes are good, that God wouldn't make faulty purposes, and that we ought to pursue them, and that they're accessible. So when we see that, like a simple example, like the eye is for seeing, we ought to see things and enjoy things with our sight. And if an eye is impaired, then we ought to eyeglasses. And
I love that. Like whether or not you agree with like ethical naturalism or like Christian ethical naturalism, or those points that Connor's summarized for us, sort of like to do it well though requires you to get the descriptive facts right, the facts about the world right.
Right, 100%.
Because if you say this knife is sharp, but the knife isn't sharp, your evaluation of whether the knife is good doesn't fucking matter at that point. Like you're wrong.
Exactly.
Unfortunately, that's the problem you see Christian nationalists take. They're like, hey guys, God made the world in this way, therefore we should try to keep it this way, or like this is the way that the world should run. But the categories they create are, for lack of better words, kind of fucking stupid.
Okay. So what are some of those categories?
We'll talk quickly about sex just a bit. We're going to talk quickly about race, obviously, a little bit more, and then class.
I see.
Not to say that those categories don't necessarily exist, because like socially constructed categories still exist. But when a Christian nationalist says they exist, they're talking about like objectively existing.
Yeah, existing in the same sense that this table exists.
Right. Yeah. And then not only that, from the existence of those categories, they can create a value hierarchy of those categories. So I have a little, in addition to what we started with in our definition of Christian nationalism, I have a little tripartite cluster.
Oh, ooh, that sounds fun.
Nations are real.
Okay.
Patriarchy good. A lot less eloquent, that one. And expansionism.
Oh, expansionism. Oh.
So nations are real. So nations sort of have to be real for them to be the prime agent of history.
Sorry, and just to clarify, these three points are corollaries of bad history and bad biology. That's your point here?
Sorry, these are the things that Christian nationalism tries to hide and are propped up by the bad history and bad biology.
Right. So tenets of Christian nationalism that are supported by bad history and bad. Yeah. Okay.
So they see groups of people congregating together. They're like, hey, look, similar people get together throughout history. Therefore, that ethnicity, quote unquote, exists.
Okay.
Instead of saying that people who live together end up being similar, which is a very different claim than the opposite. Anyways, it's fucking stupid. Like I said, it's fucking stupid. They have an essential identity, that there's a singular thing that brings them all together.
Okay.
Brings the nation together. And that thing is ethnicity, whether you call it the similarity principle or race, really just race. And within that nation, that ethnicity deserves to be dominant because it's theirs. So even if there is some mobility across borders, or even diversity of thought within the border, that essential identity should take precedence, is the argument that Christian nationalists are making. Patriarchy good, sort of touched on it with the fascism quote, how the politics of sex gets used. This is maybe the most left field one currently. We haven't talked about the patriarchy yet. So these nations exist, and those nations should be, Christian nationalists argue, governed by men, whose wives submit to male authority, both in the public square and in the private home. That's because the home is a microcosm of larger society. It's one of the quote-unquote 7 mountains of the 7 Mountain Mandate, which is a phrase that, I forget the specific sect of Christian nationalists, but they'll use to talk about the influences of power that Christian nationalists should fight in.
Right.
And so the family is one of them. If you want to read 9 for us.
Sure. In an interview with Jim Daly, the president of Focus on the Family, Dr. Tony Evans, mega church pastor and radio personality, stated, "The foundational institution of any society is the family, and whoever owns the family owns the future. The breakdown of the family is the single greatest cause of societal chaos, and all the civil government in the world can't fix that if the family is not reinstituted as God designed it to be." And
God designed the family to be patriarchal is the argument, which that's a whole fucking other episode.
But that's the sort of functionalism that I was talking about, propping its head there again.
Yeah.
Right. And importantly, the point that you made of if you have the descriptive facts wrong, then you might be making wrong claims about the goodness of the family.
Yeah, everything that follows after that, it's like the fruit of a poison tree. You know?
Right.
This line of logic also gets us to why there's so many Christians in the guns rights movement. If you want to read 10.
One of the primary responsibilities of a family is defense of the family. So when you hear them talk about their God-given right to own guns, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about the way that God delegated authority to fathers to protect their families. And so whatever method of protection is the most relevant in a particular context falls under this principle. Okay. So they believe that the Bible clearly says that it's not just a right for families to own guns, but it's kind of a moral obligation. Ooh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if you have to defend your family, obviously you have to have guns.
Yeah,
obviously. Family, again, is a microcosm for larger society, and we have to, by force, defend the boundaries of our family. This is how we get to, like, the militarism. The last point that I talked about in my little tripartite cluster is expansionism. This is the one where, even more than the racism stuff, this is maybe the one that they try to hide the most.
Right. Makes sense.
But like, if you follow their logic, this is sort of where you go to. If you think the nation under God is the best one, and that nation is your nation, why shouldn't you have the right to expand? Especially in terms of the Great Commission, this idea that you're supposed to spread the faith to, the ends of the earth. But you think faith is tied to nationalism?
But doesn't that sort of contradict their position on whatever we're calling it, like this ethno-nationalism? Because if you expand, then you necessarily expand into nations with different ethnicities, right? And then if it's not a relation of subjugation, if there's like genuine inclusion in the new larger state, then it seems like you have the problem that America's dealing with already. So where's the...
I think there's a very big if that you said. If the relation isn't one of subjugation.
Yeah, but surely it's not subjugation.
If you think the world has to become Christian for the second coming of Jesus, and you think to be Christian, you must be native born and white by definition, what does that lead to?
I mean, like, genocide. Like, you just gotta kill them. Like,
This is why they love the age of colonialism.
Man, this sounds so bad.
Yeah. They look to that and they're like, that's what we should be doing. We should keep, quote, going west, Like, we should keep expanding. The manifest destiny, Lebensraum, whatever you want to call it.
We gotta find our way to India.
That's sort of where you get to. You get to this version of Christianity and this version of nationalism that is incredibly militaristic, incredibly sort of like aggressive, and wants to promote quote unquote masculine values, which are just aggression and domination. Right. And you have this idea that the nation is real and that your nation is the best one.
Your nation is the best one, or your nation type is the best one?
So I would probably say your nation, but in practice, it's like your nation type. It's why American nationalists like Russia.
Yeah.
It's why American Christian nationalists like Russia, because they're like, we might at the end have to go back to the Cold War again, where it's Russia versus America. But for now, we're sort of on the same page.
And they probably like Putin as well.
Yeah, because he's a strong man fighting for, like, white might is right.
Right, and he's a strong Orthodox Christian, or at least
supposedly,
allegedly.
As for bad biology and bad history, we look at, or where they get the facts, if they're looking at very thin and very curated slices of history, and they look to, let's say, the age of colonialism, where white men had the most power, they're like, we had the most power, that was when we were the most Christian. However they want to justify why they're choosing that time period. And you're like, that's how it should be. But again, that justification is a very important thing. They're like, the British Empire was the greatest at the time, that's why they won. But like, if you look back, and I know this is like not really within the scope of our discussion, but I do want to push back against the ridiculous claim that Britain or white people were somehow the most innovative race. China and India actually had exports that Britain wanted. Britain's main export was colonialism, which is stealing other people's shit. So like, clearly in terms of innovation or like productivity, that's not the case. Right? Just a little aside, go fuck yourself, people who think colonialism was good. It also assumes, this sort of like bad history, bad biology, assumes a coherence in thought. Like, they think all Enlightenment thinkers sort of thought the same way. They think all founding fathers think the way that they think. They think all Christians think the way that they
thought Jesus think the way that they think.
Exactly. As if we had reached some sort of end of history. Like, we've hit truth, we shouldn't go any further. Progressing further is some liberal, wokeist agenda bullshit. Yeah. Going back is obviously wrong. Like, obviously slavery was wrong, kind of. And then
kind of.
And then they start to trail off a little. Yes. But so you have all these people that can justify their nationalistic, patriarchal agenda by saying, hey, look at where we came from. Wasn't that so great? And that's how it should be. That's when we were the most Christian nation and God blessed us for our Christianity.
Right. Or, I mean, like, people think that there has to be like a very like direct spiritual relation there, where it could be like, they could be conceiving, maybe this is a stupid like philosophical point, but like just that like,
no, go for it.
It's just in the way that the world is, that when you direct yourself and behave in a certain manner, you're going to be successful. It's not necessarily like a external blessing of God. It's that when you act as you're intended to, when you know that the knife is for cutting and then you act in a way to make it sharp, okay, you're going to be able to cut your onions pretty well. And it's
strong men create good societies create weak men create bad.
So it's internal to the world. Not it's not necessarily like God is blessing these like white colonialists. It's that
I think the non-Christian nationalists would be like that. Yes, for sure. I think that's a good distinction to make, though. I do want to point out right now, because it's a little bit confusing, because I just said the non-Christian nationalists would probably be thinking the way that Connor said it, sort of like an internal logic to the world, whereas maybe the Christian nationalists would be more likely to rely on an external sort of God or divine blessing. That being said, the values of Christian nationalism diverges very strongly from the values of Christianity. If you want to read me quote 11.
Who's this? This is Perry and Whitehead. Only Christian nationalism predicts that Americans see serving in the military as important to being a good person. Religious practice, on the other hand, is negatively associated with this view, meaning devoutly religious Americans are less likely to say that serving in the military is important to being a good person. Furthermore, religious practice is powerfully related to views of morality that emphasize ideas of care for the vulnerable, social justice, and even reducing one's consumption patterns for the sake of environmental stewardship. Christian nationalism, however, is unrelated to taking care of the sick and needy and consuming fewer goods. In fact, Americans who embrace Christian nationalism are less likely to believe actively seeking social and economic justice is important to being a good person.
Yeah. So, just to clarify, Christian nationalists aren't Christians, because what I'm going to say next is going to be a little inflammatory.
Okay.
In short, Christian nationalists are just a bunch of woman-hating, gay-hating, trans-hating racists that just want some living space. And I know that might seem sort of dismissive, and Connor sort of called me out a little bit beforehand that like maybe that's not generous enough. And I don't want it to be a conversation ender, because unfortunately we have to carry on this conversation. But I do want to be accurate in my description. If you assume, based on heritage, that you deserve a privileged position based on sex, sexual orientation, or race, and again, not so much religion, because that doesn't really factor in, you are homophobic, or a sexist, or a racist, or sort of all of the above, whether you try to use Christianese or not. Maybe read 12, just to drive that point home a little.
Christian nationalism, especially when it is held strongly by white Americans, appears to reinforce boundaries around national group membership, encouraging antipathy and mistrust towards those who do not meet the membership requirements of native-born, Christian, and white, namely racial minorities, non-white immigrants, and Muslims. Christian nationalism expresses a particular racialized understanding of national identity. It allows those who embrace it to express a racialized identity without resorting to racialized terms. Oh, that's good.
But what is the point of clinging to this identity, right? At the top of this episode, we talked about how about 20% of people who identify as Christian aren't Christian by their own definition, and that people who identify as Christian nationalists also aren't Christian. Yeah. So why? Like, beyond the obvious of what we just read, of expressing racialized identity without resorting to racialized terms, what is the project of Christian nationalism?
Is it to me?
If you want to go for an answer. If not, I can just keep on talking a little bit.
That sounded like a rhetorical question. But I think tactics is a big thing, right?
Ooh,
like it's prudential considerations. The fact that there are non-Christian Christian nationalists.
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't ask for a better proof of this phenomena, that it is
Yeah.
prudential considerations, that we do now have language of the movement that we're trying to progress. where we don't have to, at least on the surface, be homophobic. We don't have to hate the foreigner. We can just be, good Christians who love our flag, right?
Yeah.
That's very powerful.
Yeah, that's the first point. Like, it's political too. Like, it's not just justifying my own sort of internal racism, but racism sort of structurally or sociologically, right? It is to reinforce that. You get everyone to start believing or using that language. It makes it easier for people to be racist or express racist ideas.
It also gives moral justification for it. It provides the moral background for
moral justification. Yeah. It provides a sort of like good versus evil dichotomy. And the Christians are the good ones, and then the people in the bottom right corner of the McNaughton painting with the professor holding Origin of Species and the Supreme Court Justice and Satan are all the bad ones. It creates this simple worldview with black and white solutions and a clear enemy to attack. And the solutions that they provide, which is the scary part, usually is coercive, requiring the use of some force or relying on the totalitarian or undemocratic power structures that already exist.
Oh, that already exist. So not an example wouldn't be like blasphemy laws.
I mean, if they could get it on the books, I'm sure they would love it. But like, to go back to that painting, we have the SCOTUS member weeping in the face of God, and like he drops all his Roe v. Wade papers, Like, Christian nationalists called SCOTUS, the Supreme Court of the United States, unelected, unaccountable, and imperialistic judges. And they're not wrong when they say that. Like, I don't like the court system, but instead of addressing the structural issues that make them unaccountable and imperialistic, they used it as a political tool. They got Trump in office, and fucking the turtleneck motherfucker.
They're gonna put them on the other side now, and they're gonna be holding the Dobbs decision, like,
yeah, right. In 2024, the One Nation Under God Part 2 is gonna drop. It's just tactical. It's just opportunistic and tactical. Right? Another example is when cops protect the Capitol on January 6th, they were fascists. But when they violently cracked down on Black Lives Matter protesters or Occupy protesters, blue lives suddenly mattered. This is why I don't think they believe anything. Or any other things that they say they believe.
When you say that, who are you talking about? Like, are you talking about the individual Christian nationalist who holds these beliefs? Or are you talking about people who are cognizant of the power structures and utilizing them for their own advantage?
I think there's two sort of answers in that. The people who are the moral entrepreneurs of Christian nationalism, clearly they're just grifters straight up.
Right.
Even like the quote unquote true believers, I don't think they can actually be true believers because Christian nationalism doesn't offer anything to believe in. It doesn't offer an ideology. It just offers the simulacrum of ideology.
Right.
It's a farce. It's just representation without an original.
Okay.
To like recap, I think it's just all rhetoric without content. And so how can you really be a true believer? There's not belief. It's just like Christianese. You're not saying anything. Like I think an example that we talked about already is like how Reverend DeYoung thinks the church has become too meek. What the fuck are you saying? What? Jesus' first fucking sermon was like, "Blessed are the meek."
How could you be too meek?
Wait, let me just Google this just to make sure. Because it is for they will inherit the earth. So how the fuck can you be too meek? Like, oh god. Anyway, but that's what I mean. Like, you can't say that with a straight face unless you're not saying anything.
Or you're uncritically saying, which I think is more sympathetic.
I think if you watch Trump speeches, you sort of see it too. He just says random shit, like line after line after line that doesn't really fit next to each other. But then once he hits something that the crowd goes wild for, he'll just be riffing on that for like the next 15 minutes. It's not about creating something that's cohesive, coherent, makes sense. It's not about making beliefs or like proselytizing beliefs. It's about providing rhetoric for fucking racist, sexist, homophobic motherfuckers.
Wow.
That's a little dark. It also, in addition to like clearly pointing at like an outsider and being like, that's the bad guy or this is the bad thing, or it also justifies it internally, like they're not just the bad guy, but you're the victim here. You're the real you're
the Christian nationalist. Yeah.
The Christian nationalist.
Yeah.
So you're not just you're not just like cutting down bad guys. You are cutting down bad guys for the victim, which
because
you're
a poor little white man who can't and the gynocracy's taken over. You can't go to the gym anymore because you're getting man shamed.
You can't spread your legs on public transportation. You can't
get accepted to university because all these diversity quotas.
Right. Yeah.
And you wouldn't even want to go in the first place because they're not teaching anything. And why would you want to learn? Because education's incompatible.
Incompatible.
Yeah.
Incompatible. Exactly. They have something for every line of defense, you know?
You can't make this shit up.
I'm telling you, this is why it was so hard for me to write this, dude. And this is why it got so long, you know? How do you get to the core when there is no core? You just start looping around at a certain point.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you're the victim, even if you admit that like men are or were in a privileged position, men or white men become the victim because they should be in the privileged position. So like if you take that away, that's a bad thing. These dirty liberals are trying to take away what's rightfully yours. And then it reaffirms sort of their masculinity, which is it's so weird that the politics of sex and like sexuality is so dominant. Like in these like reactionary sort of like spheres, not just in Christian nationalism, but like in the right wing sort of as a whole. Because to me, that doesn't seem like it should be. It seems a little shoehorned in, but again, everything is shoehorned in because it's not a fucking ideal. But yeah, in a cultural system where men are supposed to be the sole or primary breadwinner, and an economic system that doesn't allow for that to fucking happen at all, men start to feel impotent. But instead of like changing the economic structures or redefining masculinity into something less toxic, you get the sort of like yeehaw, fucking men are warriors or protectors or sheepdogs, you know? They want to be as close to fucking psychopathic as they can without going over the line. They want to have this access to violence, but like righteous violence. It explains why like cops wear the Punisher badge.
Yeah.
Like the Punisher who is a fucking serial killer and a vigilante. Because it's cool. It's the violent fantasy where they can sort of wash their hands of the serial killer aspect of Frank Castle by focusing just on the objectively undesirable behavior of the quote-unquote criminals. They can have that power fantasy there. And I don't want to kink shame, because maybe we'll be talking about like doms in the fucking sex episode. You can cosplay all you want. You can have your fucking will to power, you know? But it becomes problematic because you get real life consequences given power dynamics, right? The cops already have a license to kill, and then you get them to start putting the Punisher badge on on themselves or on their car, and you're like, fucking, you know, you already have access to too much violence.
Yeah, you shouldn't be able to watch that. Like...
Exactly. Right? Whereas if you didn't have that kind of access to begin with and you fantasize about it, sort of makes a little more sense. It also makes it so that trying to take away access to violence becomes like an absurd thing to try to do. So if you want to read 13 for us.
Okay. When the Florida State House of Representatives had the opportunity to consider gun control legislation 1 week after the Parkland school shooting, they declined. Instead, these Florida legislators overwhelmingly passed a bill that required "In God We Trust" to be posted across all Florida public schools in a prominent place. In interviews, the Democratic sponsor of the bill, Kim Daniels, acknowledged that Florida's gun laws should be addressed. However, she and other representatives believe that Florida schools need light in them like never before, and that God is the light. According to Daniels, in order to solve gun violence in schools and communities like Parkland, the real thing that needs to be addressed are issues of the heart.
I mean, like, to some degree, I agree. We gotta address the issues of the heart, like the fucking bullying problem and all that shit. But, like, we have access to violent technologies like never before. And especially in America, where
there's more guns than people's.
Like kids can... Yeah, like, that's... What the fuck is going on? You know? In every other, like, G20 country, they're like, that's fucking a no-no. But when you start idolizing violence... Because, you know, you're the sheepdog. You know, you got to protect the sheep from the wolves or the foxes. I don't know what eats sheep, actually. I feel like it's your moral responsibility, like we talked about, to defend the family or the boundaries that you're supposed to uphold. It is nonsensical to make it less accessible, make forms or technologies of violence less accessible.
Right.
And so all you can do is thoughts and prayers. Or "In God We Trust" fucking in the hallway. Like,
yeah. Because that's
going
to help.
Insane. And lastly, Christian nationalism helps sort of maintain the hegemony by justifying material inequality. We haven't talked about class until now, but I'm doing it because obviously there's a classist spin here, right? There's a movie called Saving Christmas. 2014 movie, Christian Christmas movie. Kirk is like the main guy. He like breaks the fourth wall. He does the voiceovers. I think he's a producer. Anyways, he's clearly the main character. And I have to emphasize that he is the main character because the shit he says makes it seem like he shouldn't be.
He's an anti-hero, like.
But I don't know what the fuck he is. He's throwing a Christmas party for his family, but his brother-in-law, literally named Christian. So again, very confusing writing, because you'd think Christian would be the fucking protagonist. But okay, he sort of sees the dinner party, and it's fairly gaudy, and he's like, I don't know if this is what God would want. Isn't it too materialistic? Isn't it too consumeristic? What are all these pagan holiday rituals, like the tree and the presents and all that stuff? In Kirk, again, the main character, and like the face of this fucking publishing company, not production company.
You're publishing paintings now. You're publishing movies. Come on. Get it together.
Okay. But right, he persuades Christian, his brother-in-law, that God wants us to be like this. He says, as the camera pans over a plethora of gifts under the Christmas tree, this is a literal quote, "This is doing what God does. He's always been giving gifts at the base of trees," end quote.
I guess that's a reference to the cross. I thought it was the brother-in-law was going to come in. He's going to make Kirk's character like sort of reconsider. And then they were going to come back. There's going to be some character development. And then they're going to like end the movie at like the homeless shelter volunteering on like the 25th.
Yeah.
Like, but no.
Like How the Grinch Stole Christmas is a more Christian story.
Yeah, you saving Christmas. Like How the Grinch Stole Christmas. All that fucking redistribution of wealth. He's just like that. The Whoville Grinch is commune, just like, you know? Marx at the top of Whoville, like
seizing the means of production. Okay,
literally.
This is what I mean. Like, this is why I really wanted to emphasize that Kirk is the main character, because it seems like, given the premise, you sort of have like a reconsideration, and you're like, oh, I learned the true meaning of Christmas. But no, the true meaning of Christmas is to have fancy dinner parties with middle class and upper middle class friends. And that's not to say don't enjoy life. You know, like, we're embodied beings and the material matters, obviously. Give us this day our daily bread, you know. But it's insane to think that the Jesus who was like, if you have a second coat, give it away, would somehow not flip tables at Kirk's Christmas party, calling them a fucking brood of vipers. Yeah.
Yeah, no. Like, I think it goes back to that point about like abundance. Abundance is not necessarily bad. Mm-hmm. This is like, abundance is what we aim towards, right, in a lot of contexts and domains. It's that abundance in this context is coming at the cost of someone else not having it, right? Yeah. The fact that I can have a Christmas party and somebody else cannot have a Christmas party, that's the problem.
And the solution to that isn't to invite more people to the Christmas party, it's to just not think about them, guys. Don't worry about it. Jesus was always leaving gifts at the fucking base of the tree. Yeah.
Yeah.
Of
course.
Fuck Kirk. I don't know what your last name is, but you know who you are.
Yeah, that's so ironic, because like most of the Christmas movie, like the cheesy Christmas movies that come out, they're like sort of the ones.
It's the friends we made along the way.
Exactly. Yeah. They espouse these more like platonic values, like these less materialistic. Like, Christmas is about friendship. Christmas is about family. Christmas is about the time we share. It's about giving back and all that.
But no. You have your nuclear family, and if they're well off, good for you.
Did you watch the movie?
Blessed by God.
Are you sure that they don't eventually like get around to that point? Like,
I mean, I read the Wikipedia synopsis, and it just goes through the whole plot. So he convinces Christian, his brother-in-law, who was like, "Isn't this too materialistic to come in and enjoy the meal happily ever after?" It is deeply cynical.
So this is the problem with this kind of rhetoric. Like, there's something. My first response is like, I don't disagree with it. Like, that's my gut reaction is like, we shouldn't have to feel guilty about having Christmas parties.
Yeah.
Like, if anything, it's like one of the most basic ways that we can live the good life, which is enjoying the collective fruits of like human production with each other.
Yeah.
Like, that's what life is about, right? But it's the fact that it's uncritical about the context, and that it is I think reactive.
Even beyond that, I would say that a key sort of problem, we will go into the theological issues in more depth next sort of episode on this. We are running out of time here. But it's the fact that there's an insistence on boundaries, right? The fact that they are having a Christmas dinner isn't the problem. It's that the Christmas dinner is exclusive. If we go to 1 Corinthians 11 on correcting an abuse of the Lord's Supper.
Your favorite passage now.
My favorite passage. The passage that I spent fucking the last term of my MDiv on, basically. Paul writes to the Corinthians saying, "In the following directives, I have no praise for you, for your meetings do more harm than good. In the first place, I hear that when you come together as a church, there are divisions among you, and to some extent I believe it. No doubt, there have to be differences among you, to show which of you have God's approval. So then, when you come together, it is not the Lord's Supper you eat. For when you are eating, some of you go ahead with your own private suppers. As a result, one person remains hungry and another gets drunk. Don't you have homes to eat and drink in, or do you despise the church of God by humiliating those who have nothing? What shall I say to you? Shall I praise you? Certainly not in this manner." Like, this goes to the idea that you were saying, abundance itself is not bad, and it is something that God wants for us. It is bad when it leads to, or when it is in the face of people who lack. Right?
Yep.
If you want to be gluttonous, if you want to be gaudy, if you want to be immodest, that's one thing. And I'm not saying a Christmas dinner is the Lord's Supper, so to speak, but it is using the Lord's name in vain. You know, you are using God to celebrate yourself. You are having this Christmas dinner and you are getting drunk and getting full while others remain hungry and thirsty. So far, we've maybe talked about the clear absurdities already within this cluster of beliefs within Christian nationalism, and maybe Christian nationalism sort of as a whole. And we've touched on here and there the fact that it's not very Christian. Next episode, we will get into the sort of theological arguments against Christian nationalism a little bit more. But to address the theology of Christian nationalism, or the lack of theology in Christian nationalism, we sort of have to see how Christian nationalism approaches the text. And to give a little bit of a taste of what we're going to do for those who may know the words that I'm going to say, throw in a little subliminal, I will say that the Christian nationalist hermeneutical project is, or can be characterized as, the preferential option for the rich.
Oh, did you coin that?
Oh, me special.
I like that.
Yeah. Obviously, I'm using class terms, but really we're talking about a framework that allows people that hold it to read their sacred texts or like criticize culture or whatever from the position of the dominant group, or preferring the position of the dominant group.
Right. Yeah. That's good.
Again, I want to emphasize how not Christian nationalism is. They are unfortunately correlated. But as we discussed, when you control for Christian nationalism, religious engagement, going to like weekly service, praying, serving, is inversely correlated to Christian nationalist politics, or like policies like Trumpist policies. Christian nationalism, as one sociologist, Rogers Brubaker, says, is secularized Christianity as culture. It is a matter of belonging rather than believing, a way of defining us in relation to them. And to go to that question that Connor asked, like the grifters at the top know this. I think this should be the last quote. So this should be 14.
Clint Eastwood speaks candidly about his appeal. The secret of the man I play is that he's a superhero, a dream character for most men, Eastwood says. A guy sits in the audience. He's scared stiff about his life. He wants to be that self-sufficient legend he sees up there on the screen in my pictures. A superhuman character who has all the answers, is doubly cool, exists without society, without anyone's help. Of course, it'll never happen though.
This was on the back of the original Dirty Harry VHS. This was Clint Eastwood talking about the appeal of fucking Dirty Harry. Right? This man, later on, would obviously be a Trump supporter, fucking obviously. But in like 2015, 2016, he was like, he thought people should get over Trump's like racist remarks because, quote, those things weren't called racist, end quote, like back in his day. Which is insane.
That's such a good argument. Yeah. Like some temporal relativism there. That's pretty good.
I mean, it's innovative for sure. Yeah, but he knows the grift he's selling. He knows that like this macho man, like sort of Western figure is impossible and will never happen. But he's voting for a motherfucker who's saying, only I can save America. Only he can stop the fucking war in Ukraine, or only he can solve the Middle East crisis, or only he can stop World War III from happening. Fucking, like, what the fuck are you talking about, Clint? Like, you knew that it was bullshit when you were making the movies.
Hey, forgot. He knew then.
Yeah, when it wasn't racist back then.
Exactly.
The true believers, whatever you want to call them, like, I think they believe the rhetoric of Christian nationalism because it's convenient for them to believe the rhetoric of Christian nationalism.
Or maybe it's something like they don't see any alternatives. Like they see this as Christianity, right? And if you don't have this, then you don't have Christianity. And they're lumping a whole lot of stuff with their Christian nationalism, right? Stuff that you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? Like you want to keep Jesus. And they're thinking if we take off pregnant women in the corner and the Roe v. Wade documents on the stairs and the American flag in the back, then what's going to be left of my Christianity? And justifiably so. Right. I think that's something to be worthy of frustration or sadness.
I understand the emotional.
It's like, no, I want to keep my Jesus. And for me, Jesus is a shotgun wrapped in American flag. Sure. And so I think there is something here about wanting to be careful or a need to be careful. Sorry.
I know, obviously I was fairly cavalier about it, but I don't imagine a Christian nationalist actually listening to this all the way to the end. Here's why. I could call them, or I could be cutthroat in my analysis. But in practice, the goal is to make fewer Christian nationalists. And it's why I will, especially next episode where we talk about the theological problems with
I think that'll be helpful.
Which might resonate more with people who consider themselves Christian like very deeply, but are also Christian nationalists.
Yeah. Because I don't think anything that we'll say will have any effect on the people who know it, who know what they're doing with Christian nationalism and using it as like a tactic of Theopolitics. Like it's just because arguably it's pragmatically effective.
Yeah. Like it's incredibly effective.
Right. We have to cut off the base.
So there is a need to be maybe generous.
Because like I do see it a lot. And maybe it's people who are already more sympathetic to the sort of like criticisms that we have. Like less right wing, but like right wing. Like I see it a lot with people when talking about like the LGBTQ community as a Christian. And like I genuinely see distress in these Christians' lives where it's like you ask them like in like a heated conversation, so you think I'm like a person of a member of the community, so you think I'm living a life of sin, like you look down on me and all that, and it's like there's an apprehension. It's like, yeah, I do. It's almost like I don't want to, or like if I could get rid of like my attitudes towards these beliefs, I would. But it's just that with these beliefs, to throw them away would be too much for me.
Yeah.
Right?
It's sort of like they don't have the language to think about like homosexuality, for instance, in a way sort of separate to their Christian identity.
There's no disentanglement of their Christianity and these issues. They have, and it's so sad too, because I've seen so many people fall away from Christianity and the faith and Jesus and all this like prima facie good stuff. Simply because they could not do this disentanglement, and justifiably so, because that's what they're fed, right? They're fed. Yeah. These are not disentangleable issues. Sin and Jesus do not come apart, and all this stuff, right?
Yeah. But yeah, I really like that the conceptualization where people are trying to disentangle or want to disentangle. I think like actually Joshua Harris, great example. He ended up rejecting purity culture after going to fucking seminary school, which he went to like 20 years after he's a pastor of a fucking big old church, which is wild to me. And then he ended up like not being a Christian because he didn't know how to disentangle, it seems like, the purity culture beliefs, Christianity. And like to the people who are able to give up the faith, like, okay, that's a solution to the problem of, in a sort of like narrow sense of that word. But that's not going to be a viable solution for a lot
100%.
They will be racist and homophobic to keep their Christianity, which sucks.
Yeah.
And so the work of disentanglement obviously rests on Christians. Obviously, Christian nationalism is a problem that the church needs to deal with, but it's a problem for society at large.
But I think it's a unique problem of society in that I think society can do the work that you were formulating in the former half of your response there. It can do the work of undermining or emphasizing the homophobic, transphobic, whatever, all the nature of these things, right?
Yeah.
It can do that work. And because we don't think that that's going to be very effective, the church has the majority of the work to do here, right? Which is because that project is not going to be that effective, the church has the main responsibility in undermining these Christian nationalist doctrines and giving alternatives. For that reason, it's like super, super important and a weighty role that the church has come into, or I guess has sort of created.
So the benediction. Let your hope in God make you bold in calling out the bastardization of your faith.
Amen.
Okay. Time for announcements. First and foremost, I guess, welcome to newcomers. If you want any more information on what we talked about, there is a reading list down below. If you want help with any of that information or accessing any of that information, email us at postdenomination@gmail.com. All one word, all lowercase. We meet here, wherever here is, at 6 p.m. every other Friday. So that's YouTube, Amazon, Apple, Spotify. And I think that's it. Other than that, have a blessed week. You really? That last one really got
I'm
to
saying,
you.
like, maybe you shouldn't be so harsh on these people. Because
you're like, the sexism is all right. The weird fucking glorification of the military in my church is all right. The calling the immigrant and not Christian, all right. But body shaming middle-aged men? That's where I draw the line.
No, I didn't. It's a subject that hits close to home.
Did you know? You're pretty fit.
That could be me one day.
Stop body shaming. Indeed. Dad bods. Amen, brother.